The ground was broken, the air full of dust and silence. The stars above shone coldly over the ruins of the alien village, once full of life, now turned to ash and twisted metal and broken dreams. The soil was scorched black, the buildings lay in heaps, like forgotten bones, and there in the middle of it all, beneath a slab of shattered stone, came a sound, soft, faint, almost lost in the wind. It was a cry, not sharp or loud, but trembling, weak, like the sound of someone too tired to be afraid anymore. Nobody heard it at first. Soldiers from different alien races moved through the wreckage, their armor clicking, their eyes cold. Each one looked down, saw the mess, the destruction, the corpses, and walked on. They scanned for survivors, but when they heard the small cry, some turned their heads, then looked away. Their faces showed disgust or fear, or something worse, indifference. They knew where the sound came from, but they did not want to get involved, not with one of those, not with the cursed ones. Beneath the broken wall, under a thick metal beam, curled up like a wounded animal, was a small alien child, her skin pale blue and cracked with dried blood, her eyes glowing faintly like stars, about to burn out. Her small hands scratched the rubble above her. Her voice broke again. "Papa," she said, though no one had ever answered. Not since the bombs fell, not since the fire came, not since the sky split open and her world ended. A ship arrived late. It was human, painted white with a red cross on the side. Dust blew up as it landed hard on the edge of the ruins. The ramp dropped with a clang, and out stepped tall figures wearing the symbol of the Earth Coalition Rescue Force. One of them, a man named Captain Reed, looked around the field, his face hard, his jaw set, his boots crushed broken glass. With every step he waved his hand forward, and his team spread out, scanning for survivors, wounded, signs of life, anything at all. Reed moved toward the center, his eyes scanning every shadow. Then he stopped. His head turned slowly. He heard it again, that sound, that tiny cry, and it pulled at something deep inside his chest, something he thought he had buried long ago. Under orders and missions and grief, he walked faster, then ran, ignoring the calls from his comm unit. He passed the burned walls, the fallen towers, and came to the edge of a deep crack, and the earth cry came again, louder, now broken by sobs and coughs. It was real. Reed dropped to his knees and shoved aside debris. He worked fast and rough, his hands bleeding from sharp edges, sweat pouring down his face. Finally, he reached under a twisted plate of steel and grunted as he pulled it back. And there in the shadow, curled into a ball, was the alien child, her eyes wide with fear, her arms shaking, her voice a whisper, "Please, no more fire." Reed did not speak for a moment. He just looked at her, and she looked back, not with hate, not with anger, but with something worse, confusion, like she did not understand why anyone would help her. He reached forward slowly and lifted her into his arms. She was light to light, and her body flinched as if expecting pain, but he only held her tighter and said softly, "You are safe now." His team arrived behind him, weapons ready, eyes wary. When they saw the child, some of them froze. One of them said, "Sir, that is one of them. We cannot bring it back, sir. It is not allowed. You know what her kind did." Reed turned, his eyes blazing. He said, "She is a child. She is injured and alone and afraid, and we are not monsters. We do not leave children to die, no matter what race they are." Others hesitated. Then one by one lowered their weapons. One stepped forward with a blanket, and another with a medical scanner. The child trembled in Reed's arms, but did not resist, her eyes fixed on his face as if trying to memorize it, trying to understand what it meant to be held without harm. From a nearby ridge, another alien soldier watched and muttered, "Fools, they will pay for this mercy." He raised his wrist and tapped a hidden signal, then vanished into the smoke. Reed carried the child to the ship. The others followed. Her breath was slow, her eyes half closed, but her fingers curled around his collar, not letting go, as if he was the only solid thing left. In a universe of falling stars, as the ramp closed behind them and the ship rose into the sky, no one noticed the silent eyes watching from the shadows, and no one heard the soft click of a tracker now stuck to the hull. Only the child moved her lips, barely forming one word, "Papand." For the first time in days, she slept without fear in the arms of a human who chose compassion over command. The hum of the engines vibrated softly through the walls of the medical bay, and inside lay the alien child, her skin still bruised and her breathing shallow but steady. Machines buzzed quietly around her, glowing with soft blue light. Captain Reed stood nearby, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving her small fragile form, though his uniform was stained with dirt and his face was marked with exhaustion. He refused to rest. He kept watching, as if afraid that if he blinked she would disappear like smoke in the wind. The rest of the crew sat in the room just outside, voices low, some angry, some confused. One of them, a young soldier named Jenna, slammed her fist on the table and said, "This is madness. We are risking everything for a child that does not even belong to our species. What if it is dangerous? What if the council finds out?" Reed walked in slowly, his steps firm, his voice calm but heavy with weight. "I know what we are doing." He said, I know what it means, but I also know what it means to walk away from a crying child and do nothing, and I will not carry that silence on my Sula. Silence followed his words. Then a medic spoke up. His name was Liam, and he was older with eyes that had seen too many battlefields. He said, I checked her vitals, sir. She is malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from trauma, but she is not carrying any weapons, not even implants. Her body shows signs of severe abuse and prolonged exposure to radiation and fire. She is just a Childred looked back toward the medbay window through the glass. They could see her small fingers gripping a stuffed toy one of the humans had given her. It was a bare old worn but soft. She clutched it with all her strength, her face calm for the first time since they found her outside the ship on the rocky moon base. Other alien races had begun gathering. The ruins were still being searched for survivors, but rumors had already spread that the humans had rescued someone that should not have been saved, a creature from the race that the galaxy had labeled cursed, violent, responsible for a massacre from a war long buried in the records. A tall alien diplomat approached the human camp. His scales shimmered silver, and his eyes held no warmth. He demanded to see the child to confirm the truth. Reed stepped forward, his hand near his sidearm, and said, the child is under our care now. She is no threat, and she is not your concern. The diplomat sneered, your care will be your downfall, Captain. You protect what the rest of the galaxy fears. Do not forget the votes of the council are clear. Her species is to be exterminated on sight, no exceptions. Reed said, then the council is wrong, and if that makes us criminals for saving a life, then we will wear that crime with Pridith. Alien hissed and turned, walking away, and others began whispering dark things about the humans, calling them soft, calling them traitors, saying that compassion was weakness that would cost them everything. Back inside the ship, the child woke slowly, her body weak, her head aching. She looked around, blinking at the white ceiling, at the soft lights, at the human faces, some kind, some unsure. She saw Reed and reached toward him, her voice cracked and hoarse. She said, are you going to hurt me? No. Reed knelt beside her and shook his head gently. No one is going to hurt you, not while I am here, I promise. Ash stared at him for a long moment, then asked why. Because he said, we do not leave anyone behind, not even if the stars fall. She did not speak again, but later that night she sat beside him in the mess hall, quietly watching as he ate. He offered her food, and at first she refused, then slowly reached out, her fingers shaking, and took the bread. She ate slowly, carefully, as if unsure it was real. Samin placed a datapad on the table and whispered, look at this, it is her history. Read it, and his eyes darkened. The file was filled with lies, accusations, twisted facts, blaming her people for a war that evidence later showed they had not started. They had been used, manipulated, then blamed and erased. The council had declared them dangerous and hunted them to extinction. No trials, no proof, just fear and power. Reed showed the file to the others and said, she is not a monster, she is a victim, and we are all that stands between her and the darkness that wants to finish what it started. Later that night the ship shook slightly, alarms flashing red. Someone had breached the storage bay. The crew ran down, weapons ready, and found the power core tampered, the engines flickering, and next to the broken wires lay a council tracking beacon, freshly placed. The crew stared at each other, cold realization spreading. Someone among them was a traitor, or worse, someone had followed them from the surface. Reed ran back to the med bay and found the child hiding under the bed, her eyes wide with terror, her arms around the bear. She whispered, I did not do it. I promise, please believe. Mel lifted her gently and said, I know, I believe you, you are safe. But his mind raced as he looked toward the stars outside the window. He knew danger was coming, and they had very little time. Silence in the command room was heavy like the air before a storm. Captain Reed stood near the main screen, eyes narrowed, arms crossed. The beacon had been planted deep within the power system, and whoever placed it knew exactly where to put it to avoid immediate detection. His crew worked fast, sealing the ship from further intrusion, while the medicalium scanned each corridor for life signatures. None of them matched the enemy, but something felt wrong, something unseen, something crawling just beneath the surface of trust in the med bay. The child sat on the edge of the bed, her legs swinging slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She held the bear tight against her chest as if it could protect her from whatever fear waited behind every corner. When Reed entered, she looked up, and her voice was barely a whisper. Did I do something wrong again? Reed knelt beside her and shook his head gently. No, not you, never you. But we have to be careful now. Someone tried to hurt all of us, and I need you to stay where I can keep you. Safish nodded slowly, but her face stayed tense, unsure. Her small fingers trembled against the bear's ear. Her species had known only fear for so long. Kindness was still something she did not understand. Reed stood and left the room, his boots echoing down the hallway. He walked straight to the crew's meeting room where his officers had gathered. Jenna was pacing, her face flushed with frustration. We have to assume Someone here is not who they say they are. This is bigger than a tracker. This is sabotage. This was meant to destroy us. Reed nodded. I agree, and we need to find out who, but we do it smart. And quiet panic will only help. The Enamilium cleared his throat. I checked all the logs. One of the external doors was open during the dust storm. Just for 20 seconds, enough for someone to get on board, but not enough to trip all alarms. Whoever it was knew our system well. Reed looked at his crew and saw the weight in their eyes. The child had already divided them. Some trusted her, some still feared what she represented. Now they faced a new threat from within, and their unity was cracking. That night, Reed walked the corridors alone, thinking, listening. He paused near the storage bay and heard something faint breathing. He moved slowly, drew his weapon, and stepped into the shadows. Where the heat signature had flickered, a figure turned fast, blade in hand. Reed dodged and grabbed the attacker, slamming them into the wall. The helmet cracked, revealing a face not from his crew, but from the alien diplomatic ship. Silver scales, sharp eyes. The spy had snuck aboard. During the surface chaos, Reed questioned him hard and fast. The alien confessed through gritted teeth that the council had ordered the child's death, that anyone protecting her would be marked as enemies of peace, that fear of her kind must be kept alive or the truth might risk. The crew watched as Reed dragged the spy into the central chamber, his blood staining the floor, his words broadcast across secured channels. The council lied. He said they fear what they do not control. They label the innocent as dangerous to protect their power. This child is not our enemy. She is proof of our enemy's least. Crew stood silent, but something had changed. A wall broken, a truth accepted. Slowly, one by one, they came to the medbay, where the child sat still, clinging to her bear, and they offered her smiles, soft words, small gifts, tokens of peace. She looked at each one as if seeing a different world. For the first time, Jenna brought her a small star map and showed her how to trace constellations. The child whispered their names in her own tongue, and Jenna laughed, not with mockery, but with wonder. Liam handed her a necklace with a glowing stone. He said, this keeps my daughter calm when she has nightmares. Maybe it can help you to read. Watched all this from the doorway, his heart heavy but hopeful. He walked to her and knelt. Again she reached up without fear now and touched his face, her voice soft and broken. Papa, she said again, not as a question, but as truth. Just then the alert rang again. This time a transmission from deep space, not coded, not hidden, but public and loud. The Galactic Council had issued a universal order. Execute the last survivor of the Solari species. The child must be returned, dead or alive. Those who protect her will face sanctions and removal from the coalition. The crew stared at the message, then looked at Reed, waiting for his answer. Turned to the screen, his voice strong and clear. We do not follow orders written in blood. We are human, and humans do not abandon their own. Across the stars, people listened, some in silence, some with growing rage, and somewhere far away, the fire of rebellion began to flicker. And the child looked out the window, her reflection small but bright against the stars, knowing at last that someone had chosen her. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as family. Silence that followed the transmission was not peace, it was a storm holding its breath. Every crew member aboard the ship stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the council's message that now echoed across every screen, across every channel. A child no more than 10 cycles old, marked for death by the most powerful force in the galaxy. And all because she was born into the wrong bloodline, the wrong skin, the wrong story. Captain Reed did not blink. He looked around at his people, saw fear in some, saw fire in others, but most of all he saw resolve, the kind that grew not from orders, but from the soul. Reed stepped into the medbay. The child was curled in the corner, her hands over her ears. Though the sound had stopped, her body trembled as if the message had reached deep into her bones and awakened memories she wanted to forget. He crouched beside her and gently touched her shoulder. She looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Am I going to die? She asked, her voice dry like wind. Through as she shook his head slowly, not while I am breathing. The crew gathered in the mess hall. A vote was held, not by rank, but by heart. Every hand raised without hesitation. We protect her, they said, not as an alien, not as a project, not as a mistake, but as one of us. But their decision came with consequences. Ships began to appear on long-range scans, galactic enforcer vessels, moving fast. No codes, no questions, only silence and weapons ready. The humans had ours, maybe less. Reed sent out a signal to nearby colonies, not for backup but for witness. He wanted the stars to see what would happen. He wanted truth to have a face outside the ship. The sky turned red with engines. Fire lined the blackness above as the enemy closed, and the humans formed a wall outside the landing bay, not one of steel or fire, but of bodies and courage. They stood with armor shields, eyes fixed on the horizon. They had no intention of letting the council take what they had sworn to protect inside the child. Watched from the command screen, she saw humans standing tall even though they were outnumbered. Even though they had little chance, she saw Jenna slide a small pendant over her neck and smile. "This means you are one of us now." Liam brought her a helmet sized for her small head. He said, "If anything happens, put this on and stay low." But the child stood and walked to the door. Barefoot silent. Reed stopped her gently, asked, "What are you doing?" She looked up and said, "I want to speak to them. Maybe if they see I am not a monster, maybe they will stop." Reed looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "If you are brave enough to face them, we will stand behind you." The ramp lowered slowly. Wind and heat blasted against them. The council ships hovered above, ready to strike. Their soldiers, armored faceless, stood like statues, guns drawn, and then from behind the human wall stepped a small figurehead, held high, arms at her sides. The alien child walked forward alone. The wind tugged at her hair, her bear held tight in one hand. She stopped just within hearing distance and raised her voice. It shook, but it did not break. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I am a child. I had a family. Once they are gone, not because they did something wrong, but because you were afraid of what I might become, afraid of what I might remind you of. But I forgive you." The soldiers did not move. The air buzzed with tension. Then the council commander stepped forward, his armor gold and cold. He raised his hand and gave the order, "Fire." Reed shouted and ran forward just as the first shot came. The child stood frozen, eyes wide as light flashed. Reed threw himself in front of her. The blast struck his armor and threw him back. Fire rained down from the sky. Human shields lit up with sparks. Ships began to fall, but then something happened. Something no one expected. Human colonies across space began broadcasting the footage. Civilians, soldiers, politicians all saw the child standing with open arms, and the council firing without mercy, and their voices rose in anger, in disbelief, in shame. More human ships launched from hidden bases, from peaceful orbits, from trade routes. They came not with orders, but with rage. They formed a barrier round the child and fired back. The council forces began to retreat, but not fast enough. A dreadnought appeared, massive and dark, its weapons glowing like suns. The humans were done asking for peace. They were demanding it now. The child knelt beside Reed, who lay on the ground barely conscious. She placed her small hands on his armor, tears falling. "Papa," she whispered, "please do not go." Opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "Not going anywhere, little star, not until you shine so bright they cannot ignore you." The wind outside screamed with the roar of ships firing, engines flaring, missiles slicing through the darkness like silver fangs. But inside the human command ship, everything moved in slow motion. The child held Captain Reed's hand tightly, her small fingers stained with dirt and tears, her eyes searching his face for signs of life. And though his armor was cracked and his body broken, he still managed a faint smile that told her he was not done, not yet, not while she still needed him. Jenna rushed to them, her face pale, her hands trembling. She dropped beside Reed, opened her medical kit, and started working quickly. Every second counted, every choice mattered. Liam arrived next, shouting orders to secure the bridge. As the main screen lit up with flashing red warnings, enemy ships regrouping, heat signatures rising, all human vessels under siege. The council had underestimated Earth's fury, but they had not yet backed down. A blast rocked the hull, nearly knocking everyone off their feet. Reed tried to sit up, failed, then grabbed Jenna's sleeve with surprising strength. "Protect her," was all he said, before blacking out again. The child looked around, her tiny chest rising and falling faster now. Everything inside her screamed to run, to hide, to curl up in some corner and disappear like she had always done before. But this time was different. This time people were fighting for her. This time someone had said she mattered, and she would not let that be for nothing. She stood shakily, stepped away from Jenna, and walked to the main control room. The officers there turned in surprise when she entered, their hands hovering over panels, their eyes wide. When she said, "I want to help," Liam tried to guide her back gently, but she said again, stronger this time, "I want to help. Let me stay. I can hear their signals. I know how they speak. I know what they are planning." The crew exchanged glances, unsure. But then Jenna's voice came over the calm, "The captain is stable, but we are losing shields fast. Do what you can." They gave her a seat at the corner console, where alien frequencies were being intercepted, but not translated. The girl listened, her head tilted, her glowing eyes flickering faster than the screens around her, and she began to speak, mapping their patterns, interpreting orders, predicting movements. Within minutes, human ships were dodging attacks before they happened, striking weak points with impossible precision across the battlefield. The tide began to shift. Council ships started falling back, their captains confused, their formations collapsing under the invisible hand guiding the humans. But the council was not done. Their final order came through: destroy the ship, destroy the child, make it look like an accident. A massive warcruiser turned slowly, its cannons locking on the human command vessel. The energy built, the glow lit the darkness like a new sun. The humans shouted alerts, scrambled defenses, the dreadnought prepared to fire then. Without warning, a human ship, smaller, older, a rescue cruiser barely armed, broke formation and accelerated straight into the line of fire. It slammed into the warcruiser's front shields, with everything it had causing a chain reaction of explosions. The blast lit the space between them like a star being born. The human ship was gone. Its crew lost without hesitation, but their sacrifice gave the others the opening they needed. Human forces surged forward like a wave of vengeance, lasers slicing hulls, engines shattering council ships. Scattered, some surrendered, some fled, none stood their ground against the fury. They had awakened inside the ship. The child stared at the screen, her lips trembling. They gave their lives for Mayana. Knelt beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "No, they gave their lives for the truth. And you are the truth now." The girl stood again and walked back to Reed's bedside. He was awake this time, eyes barely open, voice rough like stone. She took his hand and said, "They called me cursed, called me dangerous, said I should never exist. But you gave me a name, a place, a home. You gave me your." Reed smiled weakly and said, "You gave us more." Outside, transmissions flooded every channel from colonies and ships and worlds, both human and alien, all asking the same thing. Is it true? Did the humans protect her? Did they fight for her, even against the council, even against everyone? The answer came from every corner: yes, they did, and they would do it again. Earth Alliance made it official. The child was granted full human citizenship. A citizen of Earth, protected by its laws, carried by its name. Her new ID was registered under the name Lyri Valen, daughter of Captain Aden Reed, survivor of the last Starfall. Council tried to respond, tried to call for sanctions, tried to deny everything. But the galaxy had already made up its mind. They had seen the footage, seen the courage, seen the child standing among giants and refusing to bow. And as the council fell into disarray, the humans placed her safely inside a stasis pod, hidden aboard a deep orbit satellite, just in case, just until peace held long enough for her to walk freely among the star sand. As the crew watched her sleep, their hearts full of something rare and powerful, they knew this was only the beginning. Stars outside the observation window drifted like glowing embers in a sea of black. The ship moved slowly across the edge of the Orion sector, carrying the message of what had happened. The story of the child who had changed everything was now being whispered in every corner of the galaxy. Some called her a symbol, others called her a weapon, but among the humans she was simply Lyri, and she had become the spark that set truth on fire. Inside the medical bay, Captain Reed lay resting, his wounds deep but healing. His chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. Machines keeping quiet watch. Jenna sat nearby, her armor laid out beside her, her hand holding a tablet screen filled with messages from strangers across hundreds of planets, all saying the same thing. "We saw her, we believe you, we stand with her." Liam entered carrying a cup of hot nutrient broth and handed it to her. She took it with a tired smile and said, "Do you think the council will really fall?" He shrugged and said, "They already are falling, one world at a time. They can no longer hide behind their lies. Not after what we broadcasted, not after what she died across space." Human dreadnoughts were arriving at Central Council space, not with the intent to conquer, but to demand justice. Video feeds played across every public screen, showing the council ships firing on a child, showing the humans taking the blast, instead showing colonies cheering, not just for survival, but for courage. In Earth, the response had been overwhelming. Children drawing pictures of Lyri, people naming shelters after her, families sending in letters pledging to protect others like her from now on. The symbol of the Solari girl holding a stuffed bear had become more powerful than any weapon in her secured stasis pod orbiting above the moon base. Lyri slowly opened her eyes, soft lights blinked around her sensors, recognizing her pulse, her temperature, her breath. She blinked twice, adjusting to the dim glow, then sat up, stretching her limbs as the pod hissed open, revealing the upgraded medical wing, now floating in low orbit. A familiar voice came through the speaker, "Welcome back, little star, we missed you." Her eyes lit up at the sound. She stood carefully, her feet touching the warm floor. As soft boots adjusted to her size, she stepped forward into the light, and there stood Reed leaning on a cane, his uniform crisp, his face pale, but smiling. She ran to him, wrapped her arms around his middle, and held tight. He staggered slightly, then chuckled and hugged her back. "I told you I was not going anywhere," he whispered. And she said, "I dreamed you disappeared, and I was alone again." He looked down at her and said, "You are never going to be alone again, I promise." And you spread fast across the Alliance that Lyri had awakened, and she was safe. The response was immediate: invitations from neutral systems, offers of protection, suggestions of peace talks between divided worlds, all asking for the child to speak, all wanting to hear the voice that had stopped warships in their treks. Human High Command held a meeting where Lyri was invited for the first time. Her small frame entered the chamber, filled with admirals, generals, leaders, and she walked with quiet strength. Her eyes meeting theirs without fear, she took a seat beside Reed and listened as they debated strategy, negotiation, retaliation. One admiral suggested demanding full control of the council. Leary raised her hand, her voice soft but clear. If we replace their power with our own, the fear will still live, and one day it will return. We must build something new, not just take what they had. Silence followed her words, heavy, thoughtful, and then nods began spreading across the room like ripples on water. That evening, aboard the communication hub, Leary stood before a galaxy-wide broadcast station, her face lit gently, her bear tucked beneath one arm. She faced the camera as billions of beings tuned in from every corner of the stars. She took a breath and said, I am Leary Valen. I was hunted for something I never chose. I was called dangerous because of what others did before I was even born, but I am still here because someone believed I was more than what they feared. She paused, letting her words settle, then continued, humans did not save me because they had to. They saved me because they saw me. And I ask all of you now to see the children hiding in fear, to hear the voices you were told to ignore, to choose kindness over silence. Her speech lasted only 3 minutes, but when it ended there were no borders left in the moment, only hearts opened by courage. Back on the bridge, Reed watched with tears in his eyes. Jenna whispered, she is more human than most of us, and Liam simply said, no, she is more than human. She is what we should all become. In the day the new galactic charter was signed, the stars above Council world shimmered with the light of thousands of ships, not a fleet of war, not a show of power, but a gathering of unity. Every species once divided by fear, mistrust, and history now stood in a fragile peace, held together by a name that had echoed across the cosmos. Leary Valen, the girl who had survived fire and betrayal, the girl who had turned enemies into protectors and protectors into legend. Main hall of the assembly tower had never been so full. Ambassadors, leaders, scholars, and civilians all stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting not for a speech from a general or an emperor, but for a child whose story had torn through the heart of the galaxy and stitched it back with threads of something older than law. Hopi outside the tower, a statue had already been raised, sculpted in silver and dark stone. It showed a young girl reaching upward, not in fear, but in trust. Behind her stood the shape of a human in armor, arms open, not as a warrior, but as a shield. At the base was carved the phrase in ancient Zalari and human tongues, no child stands alone. Inside, Captain Reed stood beside Leary, his uniform clean, his eyes clear. Though his body still carried the marks of battle, his hand rested lightly on her shoulder. She wore a simple tunic, a small pendant hanging from her neck, the one Jenna had given her, her bear tucked under one arm, worn but loved. As the hall quieted, the lights dimmed, and Leary stepped forward alone. She climbed the steps of the central podium, each step echoing into silence. She stood at the top and looked out at a sea of eyes, some full of guilt, some full of wonder, many full of tears. And she spoke. I was born into silence, into fear. I was told I was dangerous, told I should not exist. I believed them for a long time, until one day someone heard me, someone saw me, and they did not walk away. They held out their hand, and I took it, not knowing it would change the stars. She paused, her voice steady but soft. I stand here not because I am special, but because someone chose to protect me, someone chose to listen. And I ask you all to choose the same. Look beyond names and pasts and fears. Look at each other. And remember, we are not enemies. We are a story waiting to be written together. When she stepped down, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause rose like thunder, not from protocol, but from something deeper, a cry of the soul that had needed someone to speak the words they had forgotten how to say. After the ceremony, a council of elders gathered, and with human representatives beside them, they drafted the new law, called the Leary Accord, a simple but unbreakable vow that no child of any species would be abandoned, hunted, or judged for the crimes of others, that protection and care would cross all borders, and that truth would be guarded not by guns, but by hearts. Back aboard the human vessel, Leary sat with Reed, watching the stars from the bridge. They had no destination set, only the freedom to go wherever they wished. She asked him softly, do you think they will keep their promise? Reed looked at her, his face gentle. I think some will and some will not, but they will remember you, and that memory will make them better. She leaned her head on his arm and smiled, not the smile of someone who had won a war, but of someone who had finally found peace. In the quiet that followed, she whispered, I dreamed once that I was the last light in the dark, but now I know I was never alone. Across the galaxy, children told her story in schools, ships bore her name, hospitals hung her image in halls as a reminder that mercy was stronger than fear. And one day a little girl born on a distant world held a bear and asked her mother, who is this? And the mother smiled and said, that is Leary, the girl who made us remember how to be kindred among the stars. Drifting peacefully in the deep black, a human ship passed quietly, guided by a girl who was once forgotten, now carrying the future in her hands, not with power or fire, but with the simple strength of being seen. As the stars slowly turned above the edge of the known galaxy, a single ship drifted quietly, its hull marked with symbols from 100 worlds, its name etched in gold letters across the side. The Valen child. It carried no weapons, no soldiers, only explorers, teachers, healers, and at the heart of it all stood the girl who had once been hunted, forgotten, feared. Lyri Valen, her eyes now older, her voice now stronger, her heart still tender and fierce like the day she stood before death and asked for peace. She moved through the halls of the ship with quiet grace, her bare now worn to threads still tucked beneath her arm, her pendant glowing softly with every heartbeat. In the grand observatory, she stopped and looked out the massive glass wall where nebulae danced and stars bloomed. She raised her hand to the sky as if to touch the colors that once felt unreachable. That moment a message came through, a signal from a planet untouched by war, a colony of mixed species asking for help. They had no leader, no guide. They wanted to learn how to begin again, how to protect those born without power, how to raise children who would not fear. The night. Lyri turned to Reed, who stood by the console, his beard now gray, but his eyes unchanged, still sharp, still kind. She smiled, and he nodded. No words needed, the course was set, and the engines hummed to life ease. The ship sailed into the unknown. Lyri sat before a screen and began recording her final message, a gift for those who would come after her. She spoke not with pride, but with love. You were not perfect, we were not strong, we were afraid and tired and lost, but we chose each other, and that choice changed everything. We are proof that mercy is not weakness, that kindness can build bridges through stars. We are not the last, we are the beginning. The message ended and was sent to every corner of the galaxy, carried by satellites, woven into stories, sung in lullabies, whispered into winds that touched every world where hope still dared to breathe. Lyri stood one last time before the observation glass and looked out at the stars and saw not danger, not darkness, not distance, but home. Stars blinked, the engines burned steady, and behind her walked a future she had helped shape with nothing more than a cry in the dust, a hand held in fire, and the belief that no child stands alone at end.